Looks like David Fincher scores again. Hey everyone, it's Don G. Corleone here, and I'm here with a brand new movie review. And this movie review is going to be for a film that hit Netflix last weekend. And it's for a film from the legend himself, David Fincher. Well, he's had one bad movie that we all know of, but I'll mention that later. This film is going to be for one that was popular around festivals, but it never got a theater release. And that film is going to be for none other than last weekend's The Killer. And it's not only directed by David Fincher, it also stars Michael Fassbender. So, what's the plot of this movie? Well, a man solitary and cold, methodical and unsupported by scribbles or regrets, the killer waits in the shadows, watching for his next target. And the longer he waits, the more he thinks he's losing his mind, if not his cool. And it's a brutal, bloody, and stylish noir story for a professional assassin lost in a world without a moral compass. And it's a case study of a man alone, armed in a teeth and slowly losing his mind. So, yeah, for the production of this film, well, this film had been in development since 2007, believe it or not. It was around November 2007. It was pretty much also the same year David Fincher's other film around that time, Zodiac, had released. It was reported that David Fincher would be directing an adaptation of the Matt's French comic book, The Killer, with Alessandro Caron writing the script, and Brad Pitt's Plan B Entertainment producing and Paramount Pictures distributing. But it just never came to fruition. It just never got made around then. During that time, David Fincher had made films like Curious Case of Benjamin Button, Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, Gone Girl. So it just never happened to see the light of day for a while. Then by February 2021, David Fincher had taken the project to Netflix, where he had signed an overall deal, and Andrew Kevin Walker now writing the script and Michael Fassbender circling the lead role. And by June, it was reported that Fincher was planning to begin filming November 2021 in Paris, and cinematographer Eric Messer-Smith. And Tilda Swinton even joined the cast in October. Then principal photography would begin November 2021 in Paris, and it continued in the Dominican Republic in December 2021. Then it moved to New Orleans later on. Then it moved to Chicago. And then to St. Charles for 10 days in March last year. And it wrapped later that month. And after that, The Killer was complete and finally complete. It could finally be released to the public. Right there, and before it released into Netflix, or had a limited release, The Killer would premiere at the 80th Venice International Film Festival on September 3rd, 2023, around Labor Day weekend. Then it got a limited theatrical release around Halloween weekend, October 27, 2023. But it didn't really get fully released to the public on Netflix until last weekend on November 10th, 2023, Remembrance Day weekend. And how was it received by critics? Well, predictably so. It obviously got positive reviews from critics, and that's not a shock because it's David Fincher. And David Fincher, to me, has always been a phenomenal filmmaker. I loved Seven, I loved Fight Club, I loved Panic Room, I loved Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. All four of those films are and specifically though, 3 of these movies I mentioned are some of my favorite films of all time. While sadly though, Fincher is also the director of one of my most hated sequels of all time, Alien 3, but I don't even blame him for that at all. I don't think that movie is his fault at all, because even he hates that piece of shit as much as pretty much we all do. Like, that was not even the movie Fincher wanted to make, and he really disowned that movie, so I refuse to call that a David Fincher movie, like some people might think they can. And to me, Seven is his first film he did. And I leave it like that. This movie, The Killer, back to this movie, it was another great film. I really enjoyed this one and thought it was a great drama film. When it comes to the lead actor, Michael Fassbender, I'm not a fan of the X-Men films he's in much. I think Days of Future Past is overrated. I don't like Apocalypse. Dark Phoenix is even shittier of the bunch. Like, X-Men First Class I used to like, but not so sure if I do now. But, so yeah, I'm just not a fan of the X-Men films he's in, and I prefer Ian McKellen as Magneto. Right? That to me will always be it. That, Ian McKellen to me is always going to be the true Magneto I know. But I don't mind his other performances. In other movies, I like him in. He's better in other movies if they're not from a franchise. When it's an original movie, he gives a good performance, especially his performance in 12 Years a Slave. And this movie is easily, I think, his best performance I've seen. When it comes to this whole movie, this one is a movie that's split in 3 chapters and an epilogue. That's how our movie goes. So it's like one of those movies. And this is like in an age where cinema just falls into the trap of producing dull sequels, prequels, reboots, requels that retcon good sequels, or bring back films who died. It's just soulless profit-driven content for fan service and nostalgia. The Killer stands out as a brilliant exception in this rare era. David Fincher's direction is always detail-rich and obsessive. It brings to life a story of a hitman who would impose a rare mistake. Michael Fassbender's portrayal of the assassin is both captivating and nuanced, and adds a remarkable depth to the character. Now, the movie does have a generic name, and that might not help for some people, but I can see that. But I don't mind the title of this. I like how narratively it's nice and simple, it's frequently tense, and it's quite entertaining. There's a fair bit going on under the surface. There's definitely themes here that feels like Fincher's explored this good deal throughout his career, especially like, it's though very different to films like Fight Club, but it feels reminiscent, and tonally and stylistically, and it's right up his alley. And it's a precise and calculated filmmaker taking on a story about a seemingly precise and calculated assassin. David Fincher is as meticulous in his filmmaking craft here as his main character and his professional craft. The Killer could definitely become the new handbook of how to make a perfect-looking film. Fincher delivers his dark and gritty tendencies in familiar fashion, and this time slightly more reserved and introspective. In his scalpel-like accuracy, he carefully constructs this gripping character in this movie to study. It tackles the addictive nature of a personal vendetta and the mental sanity and emotional control needed to remain successful and alive in the line of work. And it's a constant heartbeat within the sound design. And the effortlessly rhythmic editing and the hauntingly calm narration from Michael Fassbender wax as methodically meticulous as David Fincher would directs. And once you get to that opening scene in Paris, where we first meet our protagonist is on a stakeout, and it cleverly sets the tone for the entire narrative, and introduces us to a character whose actions speak louder than words. When the assassin makes an unprecedented error, the story takes this dramatic turn. It challenges his own principles and forces him into unexpected confrontations. And from the opening scenes, it's clear the Killer was not about elaborate twists or convoluted narratives. And it just drew me with a narrative that's stripped down to its essence and allows the characters to shine. The protagonist's journey actually feels personal in this, it's relatable, and he carried a weight that's definitely going to stay with you after the movie ends. The premise is definitely a pretty dark premise, but despite that, The Killer is infused with Fincher's signature humor, making it one of his most unexpectedly amusing films, and it's a movie that manages to comment on modern society's distractions as both clever and critical. And this, like, David Fincher's direction of this movie, it's nothing short of exceptional. It creates an atmosphere of tension and intrigue that lingers long after the credits roll, and the editing and the background score complement the narrative perfectly, and enhancing the overall experience. When it comes to the performances of the movie, from the cast of the movie, the performances of actors of the movie, Michael Fassbender and Tilda Swinton, they easily steal the show in this. Both actors deliver controlled and superlative performances that add depth and complexity to their characters, and it makes every moment on screen captivating. And the film is intersped with like many voiceovers, and it shows you the killer's precise and detailed way of thinking. Then you see how he repeatedly acts in completely the opposite way. It makes it clear his hunt is not personal, but it's a campaign eventually triggers because he denigrates someone very close to him. And he says he can't allow himself any empathy or compassion, but he lets go of of this one person who's literally just begging for the well-being of his children. So he's not like an actually straight up serial murderer. He may seem like a hitman and a killer, but he actually does have his boundaries with certain people. He has his boundaries right there, and that's good. That's actually a good character right there. When the killer does do any murders, it's very cold, but it's staged with great intensity and elegance. And when there's an action scene, it's filmed with force and thoroughly and so blatantly. This is easily, whenever a drama movie does an action scene, it's sometimes but whenever Fincher does it, it feels like something you have not seen in a long time. It's not like over campy. Like if you're expecting like John Wick levels of action, no, this is actually pretty serious action. There's like this one that doesn't have any of the campiness of John Wick, but there's a few action scenes in there, and they feel very groundbreaking. The film has this very slick and elegant look too. It definitely can be said about the rest of the film's production, which for Fincher standards literally consists of a lot of shaky cam, but it's used to the best effect. It's not like a lot of other Hollywood movies that seem to do it for a dumb gimmick. The shaky cam actually works very well in this story, right here, and it doesn't seem to get overforced. The same also goes for the whole story. Like it just glides along, and it just slides past you at an entertaining pace, with the necessary effect, of course. And everything is just reduced to the bare essentials. Nothing feels inflated in any way. Yes, the movie is more than 19 minutes long, but it never feels boring. And the killer is actually a character you could really feel a connection to. Right here, Michael Fassbender gives this very well done performance that actually makes you sympathize with him as a character. The killer told his perfect story, and just when though the story was finished, he added something to the story, and it makes you okay with getting a little more. Or Fincher did anyways. Like no other movie, surprisingly, no other movies have recently done that. Like, especially a lot of movies today, and movies this year, in general, because this year has definitely been a pretty shitty year for films. And there's a precision to every aspect of this movie that feels totally reflective of its main character, but it's very telling of Fincher as a filmmaker. And surprisingly, a lot of Fincher movies are really long. Times that's often a thing with his films, but this is actually his second shortest movie he's done, and it's not a single moment wasted despite that. As much time as Fincher spends on a setup for these set pieces, it feels deliberate and pays off in a wholly satisfying way. And a slow build up to the moment of execution, a rising tension released suddenly to burst unglorified ruthless violence, the ensuing narrative takes full advantage of modern day conveniences, and for the unlucky few inconveniences, at first it feels like bland product places instead lends itself to the ease with which the systems in place today could be exploited by anyone who knows how. It definitely makes you think twice about the next stranger you bump into. And the film's also not only that, the film also feels refreshing. And I mean like refreshing in ways of just washing away some of the cliches of the spy and assassin genre as a whole. There's much room for this nice, slick, efficient, cool head character instead of them getting emotional like they aren't a pro and ruining the job they're meant to do. The cliches of not getting emotionally and losing the upper hand, and big car chases where the cops the scene of the crime in 12 seconds, but there's also the 500 cop cars driving down every street they escape down. Cars not starting or dropping something, and stealing some information, either getting caught or almost getting caught. The suspense they build at these types of scenes in The Killer, it has you thinking that it's going to happen, but it doesn't, which is why it makes this film better than anything the spy genre has done in recent times. The killer in this movie, he's a smooth operator and he gets things done. When it comes to dialogue, well, I will have to mention this, guys. The film relies just heavily on voiceover to describe the main character's inner motivations, and it could take a few scenes to get kind of accustomed to it, but once it does, it actually feels like a vital pass of the killer's development. And now it's not like a mute film, guys. We get dialogue from him, and it feels completely earned, and with Michael Fassbender's chillingly on-point performance, there's much more weight to his lines than there would have been otherwise. And more about Michael Fassbender's killer. Michael Fassbender's killer is this man of few words, but he still communicates this so much thanks to ever-present voiceover that feels necessary to know more about who he is. It gets to the hypocrisy at the core of the film, as the killer constantly reiterates to forbid empathy to all of his actions and are motivated by his own attachments. Yeah, like, him and Tilda Swinton, Michael Fassbender and Tilda Swinton in this movie, they have good romance chemistry here. It's not like over cheesy, it's not over forced here, and it's not like an over forced love story here at all. Their scenes together are actually really perfect. And it's exceedingly well acted. Everyone in the movie's spot on. It's no slack from anyone whatsoever. And I definitely give David Fincher and the casting directors their due in saying that there's one character that in the film isn't really perfect for the role. The fight choreography is also jaw-dropping and real when it does happen. Here. And also, not only the performances are good, the soundtrack of the movie is also great. And it's done by the score composer Trent Reznor, who I think does a good job with the soundtrack. It's nothing crazy, but it's still strong. The soundtrack is definitely the right amount of flavor that reinforces the subtle nature of the flick. And now I will mention this. I always like to mention the finale in my reviews, but the finale this year, I think this one is easily one of the best finales I have in any movie I had witnessed this year. How the movie goes is like, the killer, Michael Fassbender's character, he drives to Florida, he breaks into the home of the brutish assassin, then attempts to ambush him late at night, but the assassin, of course, ends up knowing the killer's there in his house, and he viciously attacks him, so the killer gets badly injured, but he manages to kill the assassin and burns his home down afterwards. Then after that, he travels to Beacon, New York, confronts the older assassin in a gourmet restaurant, who then appears to accept her fate. The assassin then pretty much questions the killer's motivations in continuing the profession. She then finishes her dinner, and the assassin allows the killer to proceed with her murder outside. He shoots her dead after she trips and asks for a hand. Then a small dagger falls from her palm and that pretty much indicates right there that she was actually clearly planning to actually surprise him with a sudden stab. But that failed, so yeah. But her attempt failed because the killer still killed her anyway. Then after that, the killer goes to Chicago, where the main client he was after the whole time was actually a billionaire manager, and he lives in an upscale apartment. The killer observes the guy's routine. He uses inexpensive tools purchased on Amazon, and he clones his home key card and currently building security. He confronts Claiborne at gunpoint, and he asks him if he ordered the realatory hit out of personal grievance. And Claiborne claims that as a first-time client of a hitman, who was simply startled when the killer botched the hit. And the hunter suggests the idea of tying loose ends, but didn't know what was entailed, and that he has pretty much no problem with them. And the killer decides to spare Claiborne, but he promises to kill him if he ever suspects that Claiborne tries another hit on him. Yeah, pretty much and the reason he was doing all this is because during the beginning of the film, Magdala was injured. Magdala was injured around then, and it pretty much, you could tell the killer really loves his girlfriend Magdala. It was Tilda Swinton's character, and now he's going on this little revenge mission here, and it's not an over generic revenge mission right here, but at first you think maybe her injuries are fatal and she'll die, but once the killer decides to go back home to the Dominican Republic in the epilogue, he sees that Magdala is recovering and is waiting for him. And when he gets back, he decides that he's going to assimilate to retirement, and is probably going to likely retire from his hitman life. So I really liked how it ended right there. We see him travel from Dominican to New Orleans to Florida and to Chicago, an entire 2-hour film about him hunting down the guys that injured his girlfriend. Then he returns to where she is, and she's already starting to recover and get better. The killer himself then decides to contemplate retirement to finally have a life with her. So yeah, it was a good way. It's not a sequel bait ending. There's no sequel setups. It actually ends perfectly right there. But if there would have to be a nitpick for some, I think the nitpick would probably have to be this. Now, there's definitely some that may argue that the killer does lack the complexity found in other David Fincher films, but for me, that simplicity was a breath of fresh air. It might not be for some people, but for me, I think it's a breath of fresh air for me. It allows me to savor every moment of the film without the distraction and infinite plot lines, and focuses instead on the characters we're supposed to be attached to and their journey. The film's charge lies in its ability to engage on a personal level. It's a rare quality that sets it apart. The one nitpick, though, maybe can't agree on, is that the film does rely on voiceover quite a bit. So that's probably going to bug some people, but just try to ignore it, and you should probably be fine. I mean, there's still dialogue in the movie, but sometimes the film does rely on voiceover for most of the killer scenes. But I don't think it should be much of a problem. Because, like, other than those little problems that some people may have, The Killer is another masterpiece from David Fincher, and I feel like this should have went to theaters. This should have went to cinemas. I hate this got dumped to Netflix. It did not deserve to be dumped to Netflix. It deserved to go to theaters, and it deserved to have a Blu-ray and DVD release. Because it's another great masterpiece from Fincher. Right here. This totally deserved to go to theaters, and I'll never get why stupid idiots from Hollywood, like, dump this onto Netflix. Even though, like, the very weekend this came out, the actors' strike literally ended. The actors' strike was practically over. Around the very week this movie released onto Netflix, so I bet whatever studios rejected this must have felt so stupid for dumping this to Netflix. Maybe it wouldn't have made too much of a huge profit, but it definitely would have still been worth a try. I would have loved to see this in theaters. In the end, though, The Killer, it's definitely worth the watch for fans of David Fincher, and those that want to see both him and Fassbender again in a film, even working on one together. Anyways, guys, that's it for my review of The Killer, and if you're wondering how I'm going to rank The Killer, here's how I'm going to rank this movie. So overall, if you are a fan of David Fincher and Michael Fassbender all together, then totally watch this movie on your Netflix, no doubt. And if you are wondering how I'm going to rank The Killer, I'm going to give The Killer a 9.5 out of 10. There we go. That wraps up my review for The Killer. So you're wondering, what's going to be the next review? Well, the next review is going to be for a film I did see in theaters. And a film I did see in theaters the same weekend this came out. And it's one that actually came out in October. But I didn't really see this one until Remembrance Day weekend last weekend. Because I was busy. And didn't have time to go there. And I was a little hesitant to see it. Because of the runtime. But it's, of course, the new film from Martin Scorsese himself, Killers of the Flower Moon. So that's going to be the next review. Yeah, so I figured that I'd do the films I saw in theaters. Films I saw last weekend. And then get on to maybe some Christmassy stuff. But yeah, even if it's not a Christmas review, this is going to be the background until New Year's. When I make the worst and best of 2023. I mean, and literally, like, shockingly enough, yeah. And the reason why I wasn't on is because I was observing the actors' strike deal, observing if I had to go on hiatus next year or not. I mean, I get some of you were asking me to review older films, but the thing is, guys, reviewing older films is great, but if it's like 2 long months, it's going to start to get boring after a while. I mean, I had to rely on that most of the pandemic because my promise was because back then, even if it seems perfectly safe, my promise was too scared to open the theaters in the spring. They waited till bloody summer to finally do it. So, I mean, no, during the first bit of the pandemic, they opened them briefly. Then November, they shut them down again, and they refused to even open them up one bit until June 2021. So, that's not the cycle I want to go through again. But since the actors actually got a fair deal last week, will not be going on hiatus. No hiatus. So there will be no hiatus after all. If you thought I was still going to be doing that, I'm not. Alright, but yeah, that's why I didn't see much reviews after Halloween. But yeah, guys, anyway then, that'll be it for this review. Thank you all for watching. If you like this, want to see more, don't forget to like, subscribe to Don G. Corleone.